Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where we are now in our third season of helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, dietitian, running coach, twin mom, and fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchuk Performance Nutrition, I've spent over a decade helping runners learn to fuel their bodies better, unlock their best running performances, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. This podcast is all about helping you become the very best runner you can be by teaching you the running-specific nutrition, training, and recovery strategies that you need to reach all your wildest health, fitness, and running goals. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, join me each week as I share my best advice, interview guest experts, and talk to everyday runners who are conquering their goals by tapping into the power of performance nutrition, with a side of some myth busting too. And if you're looking for even more tips, resources, and strategies for runners, you can find me on Instagram at Steph the Runner's Dietitian or by visiting www.stephanienatchuk.com. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Start today's episode, I just want to really quickly invite you to download my free fueling guide and strength training guides for runners. Currently available as a handy little bundle for you all in one at the link in the show notes. So just to give you more information, in this free fueling guide, you're going to find my top fueling tips for runners. As well, in there, I've put together some meal ideas and even a couple of recipes for your pre and post run fuel. We've also got some suggestions for what to fuel with during your run to make sure that you just have the best overall performance possible. If you've really been struggling to understand what to eat, when, where to start when it comes to supporting your running with better nutrition, this guide is here to help you kickstart your running journey. The other guide that I mentioned is my strength training guide for runners. We know that runners are notoriously bad at consistently getting their strength training in. So this guide includes both a PDF resource, it's got some tips, some guidelines, as well as a link to my series on YouTube where I walk you through all the exercises in this program, giving you some suggestions on proper form, how to modify if needed, how to progress things if needed. This is a really great beginner's guide to strength training for runners who want an effective but efficient full body workout that is going to support the key muscles and movements you need to run stronger and help stay injury free. So once again, both of these guides are available as a handy little bundle. So you just click on the link in the show notes, enter your email address once, and both of the free guides are going to get sent to your inbox right away. I really hope that you find these guides helpful and that they support you and your running goals in the most effective way possible. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast. I, of course, am your host, Stephanie Natchuk, and we are here today to talk about I'll call it a disturbing trend in the running industry that you may or may not be familiar with. You may or may not have seen people taking part in this online, sharing about it, talking about it, that sort of thing. But what it is something called raw dogging a marathon. Now, what that means, of course, as you may know, that can have a lot of different definitions, but specifically when we're talking about raw dogging a marathon, it is the concept of basically running a marathon with essentially no training, right? Minimal training, little to no training, specifically for that race. Now, if you're listening to this episode and you have run a marathon, then you may gasp in horror at the idea that somebody would attempt such a thing with little to no training, right? Because we all know that marathons are no joke, right? Marathons are hard. Marathons take a tremendous amount of effort and time and dedication, to build up the fitness, to build up the ability to build up the strength in your body to be able to do it safely, the mental capacity to do it, right? There are so many things that we train for, months for a specific race. I mean, we train for years to be able to run marathons and run marathons better. So to then kind of see this like trend in some online spaces, I don't think it's going to be like a huge, huge thing. But, as, certain things go viral, kind of have their moment in the spotlight, the idea that somebody just sort of picks up one day and just runs a marathon with no training kind of for fun is definitely, makes you sort of like stop and think and take note of that. And of course, the more attention things get online, then the more people are sort of maybe motivated to hop on the trend and see that a lot of people are getting attention for it, that they want to try it too. And, of course, this is how things become viral trends. Now, if any, probably millennials or older are listening, I don't know if you remember there was an episode of the TV show How I Met Your Mother, and this is what it always makes me think of. And in fact, my husband and I kind of like joke about this all the time. One of the characters, Marshall, is training for the New York City Marathon. The show takes place in New York, and Barney says to him, another character, Barney says to him, "We talk about like you don't train for a marathon, you just run a marathon." And there's some back and forth about whether or not that's true, whether or not that's the case. So then it comes down to the race. Marshall gets injured, he can't run, so Barney takes his bib and in fact goes and raw dogs this marathon. And he legitimately does it. Everyone, they go and they watch and they see him running by at all these checkpoints and whatever. And it's all fun and games until he gets on the subway to go home later, and his legs don't work, and now he's stuck on the subway because he can't get off because he can't stand up. Anyway, it's a very funny episode. I like that show. But maybe he was the OG of trying to raw dog a marathon, was the great Barney Stinson. Anyway, so that's what it is it's, signing up for a race, whether you're signing up in advance or signing up very last minute, and just showing up and just running and seeing what happens. Now, like I said, most of you listening, if you have any kind of running racing experience, you know that is definitely not something that I would recommend you do. Like 0% of the time do I think it's a good idea to show up to a marathon and just run it just because. Shorter distances are, of course, different, right? There is far less risk health-wise, physically. There's just the shorter the distance, if we're talking like a 10K or even a half marathon, a half marathon is still a big distance. Like I still don't recommend that you show up to a half marathon with no training, but like you can get away with more and you can kind of get away with making some mistakes in a half marathon that you can't in a full. When you're looking at like the sheer distance and the wear and tear on your body of like doing a full marathon, I mean, we don't recommend, like, even if you train for these things, we still don't recommend doing them like that often. Like 2 marathons a year, like like that's a lot, right? Like, the ideal marathon schedule is even less than that, like a marathon every like 18 months. And that's with proper training, right? Like that proper buildup, having that volume, like your body being adjusted and used to doing that amount of running. So it's definitely something that has far, far more risk associated with it versus benefit. But of course, there are always reasons why people do things, and always someone who is doing it and getting away with it seemingly successfully or seemingly, unharmed. We don't always see what goes on in the background. Like we don't always see kind of the aftermath of these things, right? Somebody like does a thing online, they post about it, everyone's like, oh man, that crazy thing that guy did. And then like maybe you never see anything from them ever again or never hear from them ever again. And you have no idea, right? They could have like permanent damage to their health, permanent damage to their bodies as a result of doing that. But we don't necessarily have that part of the story. We're just seeing like that one little, Instagram reel or TikTok video where this person is crossing the finish line and, feeling really proud of their ability to get through this race essentially untrained. And I mean, this really kind of speaks to, I think, the bigger issue that we have in every industry. This is not a running specific thing, but the issue of like so many things centering around social media and social media presence, that like even just the act of signing up for marathons and racing in general, but marathons specifically have gotten tremendously popular over the last couple of years. And I think a lot of it has to do with social media and that pressure to be performing online, and that pressure to be like jumping on trends, doing what other people are doing, running the world majors, right? Because they're like the biggest events. And in our pre-social media era, yes, there were fewer people running. Like that's true. But also like unless you were very much in the running community, like going to running groups, hanging out with other runners all the time, like, really kind of immersed in that culture, like you didn't know about a lot of these things, or sort of the importance of these world majors and all of that kind of stuff. So, social media has really changed the fabric and the landscape of what can sometimes even motivate us to do certain things. And, I talked about this in episode 1 from this season, when it comes to goal setting, we need to be so intentional about our why and our motivation and reason for doing things and setting goals for ourselves, in that it can't be something external. It can't be something that we just see other people doing, so we kind of get dragged along with it. Because if that's the case, like we're not going to have fun. We're not going to enjoy ourselves. We're not going to want to see it through. It's going to be a struggle. And so we need to be making sure, especially in our social media age, we need to be making sure that any goals or we set for ourselves, anything we sign up for, anything we're trying to achieve, we have a deep meaning and a deep why behind it. And like, yeah, we're all out here on social media, like trying to do our thing, trying to grow our communities, grow our followings. Like I'm right along there with all of you, kind of in the trenches, as it were, of being on social media. And I mean, I know that like even for me personally, me posting about like my typical Wednesday get up and go for a run, easy miles, like whatever. I mean, that stuff doesn't get like, nobody's liking that. I mean, you get a few, but right. But it's like, that's not the big stuff. But when you post the bib picture with your outfit and everything laid out for your race, or when you post a picture of like you with your medal afterwards, like we all know that that's the stuff that gets a ton of attention. And of course, you know, good or bad, whatever. I mean, we can think of it any way we want. That is what I think leads a lot of people to doing some of these things and maybe not putting in the proper time and training, is that they might not realize how much time and training goes into running a marathon, or they might think that, that just doesn't really apply to them. They don't need to do that. So there's definitely going to be a proportion of people who show up and kind of want to raw dog these races that don't kind of have that Barney Stinson mentality, where they don't think that training is important. They don't see the value in putting in that consistent effort into training. And it's, you can kind of understand, like you see tens of thousands of people running these races, so many like different ages, different shapes and sizes, like all, genders, all abilities. Like you see so many people as part of this marathon landscape, that from an outside perspective, it might sort of be like, oh, well, if that person can do this, then surely I can, not knowing that this person has been running for 30 years, or at the very least has been following a marathon specific training plan for the last 6 months, or something like that. So, you know, when we have to be very careful to not look at people and try to make any assumptions about their fitness level, their abilities, their fitness background, their running history, or anything based on visual appearance, and I think that that's probably why some people think that, oh, running, no problem, right? Like if they can do it, certainly I can, not realizing how much consistency and how much effort has gone into getting those individuals ready to do that task. And then of course the other thing, just talking about our why and our motivation is, really thinking and deciding to yourself, like, do I love running? Like, do I love running enough that I want to do this 4, 5, 6 days a week for months at a time leading up to a race? Or all the time, right? Like all year round, do I want to be getting out there running a minimum of 4 days a week, like all the time to like be a runner? Or is it that signing up for events, signing up for races is a great way to like get medals and get that online attention. But like truly at my core, I do not care about running and I do not love running and I do not want to put that extra time and effort in, you know, and there's sort of this like, some people might just see it as, okay, well, running isn't that hard and I can just get up and do it. Look at all these other people. It also might be that they know how hard it is to run a marathon, but they are wanting to like prove that they're tough enough to be up to this challenge. And some of these individuals might be very experienced runners, marathoners, who for this particular race have not put a lot of time or effort into a training plan for this particular race, but they have run marathons before. They know what it takes to run a marathon. They have a level of fitness, a level of strength, a level of endurance that sets them up far, far ahead of, you know, anybody who is trying to attempt raw dogging a marathon that has not done those things before. So the other thing we need to understand and remember is there's a huge difference in the different types of people that might attempt something like this. And we want to not jump on a trend, jump on doing something just because someone else has been successful with it. Again, not knowing kind of their history, their background, and, you know, what their day-to-day training might look like. I mean, they might be somebody who does run 5, 6 days a week. They just haven't trained for this marathon specifically, you know, and that's a huge difference between that and somebody who doesn't run and is going to just show up and just run a marathon. You know, the other, of course, reason that somebody might do this is also sort of unintentional, right? Like there's plenty of times when you all of a sudden get an opportunity to run a race and it's sort of last minute and you didn't really plan to do it 6 months in advance. But hey, you know what? Maybe you're traveling somewhere and there's going to be an event taking place while you're traveling. Maybe a friend of yours had to drop out or someone in your running club had to drop out and they want to, you know, transfer a bib, or you know, maybe it's a dream race that like all of a sudden you're getting your chance to run it and it's a little bit last minute. Or maybe life got in the way during your training cycle and you didn't get in the training that you wanted to, right? Your training didn't go to plan. I actually did an episode about this specifically on the podcast closer to the end of season 2 about like what to do when your training hasn't gone as planned and, you know, what to do when you're like a bit behind the 8 ball on the whole, you know, training process and how to kind of like shift or rejig things to set you up for the most possible success on race day. So maybe it doesn't feel like you're just showing up and running completely untrained. So all that to say, you know, there are a lot of reasons why somebody might, you know, ultimately end up showing up to a race without a lot of proper training or a lot of formal training kind of going into it. Lots of, you know, different sort of spectrum on why this might happen. And for those of you who kind of fall into like the second half of those reasons, you know, people who aren't necessarily doing it intentionally, trying to like prove themselves or showing that like running is no big deal and you just get up and do it, you know, you might have a choice to make, right? Like, do you basically raw dog it or do you drop out? And, you know, if you've invested a lot of time and money and, you know, travel plans and all of those things, like a lot of times you kind of just have to like get out there and do it, right? But I do want to talk about the risks of showing up to a race unprepared. And, you know, of course, this is going to be more extreme or kind of more of a risk for people who don't have like a strong base of training, a strong base of fitness, have not done these distances before going into raw dogging a race. If you're coming into this as, you know, you've done lots of races, you have lots of experience, but just this particular race, your training didn't go quite to plan, or this particular race, you didn't quite train up to the volume that you wanted to, it's going to be very different versus someone who's like, I don't run and I'm just going to show up and just like run this marathon. Even though we see tens of thousands of people in so many of these races, your social media feeds might be inundated with marathon runners, and it just seems like everybody and their grandma's running a marathon. It seems like maybe a not that hard thing to do. You know, there's a ton of health risk and not just like physical, oh, you're going to like hurt your knee or like pull a muscle or like you're going to be sore after. Like this is not just a matter of like, I'm going to need some recovery time and need to take some time off for exercise. Like that's part of it. But we also need to understand that there are like health risks, like internal, systemic, cardiovascular, GI, like health risks that can come with doing this and being completely unprepared for it. It's not just a matter of like, oh yeah, you're going to be really sore. You know, without sufficient training, yes, physically our bodies are not prepared for the repetitiveness of running 26.2 miles, right? To put that into perspective, that is going to be like a minimum of 50,000 steps. For most runners, we're looking at more like 60,000 plus steps. Like depends a little bit on your stride length, of course, but like at minimum, you're looking at 50,000, 60,000 steps to run 26.2 miles, plus the added impact forces of doing that, right? Like there is a lot more impact force on our joints, on our muscles, on our bodies from running versus just walking those 50 or 60,000 steps. You know, even if you are a very active person, I don't encounter a lot of people who are getting, you know, more than 20,000 steps a day on a consistent basis. Like you know, pretty high volume runner might be, you know, getting more than like 15 or might be right around 15 on average per day. If you are a pretty high volume runner, plus you have an active job, like, yeah, maybe you're getting into the 20s, but again, like that's not the majority of people, right? That's not a lot of us that are consistently getting more than 20,000 steps a day on a regular basis. If you're like most people, you're going to be like around the 10,000 step per day mark, maybe less, maybe more. So we're talking about 5 times the amount of movement, 5 times the amount of steps that you would be getting in a single day versus what you're used to. So like imagine that additional impact force, that additional repetitive strain if your body is completely unaccustomed to that, right? Like you just have never done anything like that before. Now, again, if you're someone who is a pretty regular runner, like you've got a lot of running experience, then you've got some of that strength and that endurance, and your body is used to doing this to a point. But if you don't, I mean, you can get you know, some very serious lower body injuries as a result. Everything from like stress fractures, tendon and ligament strains, obviously pulled muscles, Achilles tendonitis. We can get knee pain, knee problems, right? These are things that like when we are smart about building up our training volume, this is not going to happen. But doing this volume, this load in one shot, that's where things are going to break down because we have not built up the strength and built up the fitness in those body structures. And then of course, like I mentioned, it's not just about the body and like our physical body that is going to be at risk here, right? We have increased stress on our cardiovascular system because, you know, if we have not trained, we have not forced our heart to get more fit, get stronger, we haven't worked on that endurance, then we can wind up with things like heart arrhythmias. We can get fatigued, we can have dizziness, fainting, right? We can't keep up with the demand for oxygen and blood flow. And of course, there's a very serious condition called rhabdomyolysis that we can find ourselves experiencing, which basically is a condition, is a situation where a person pushes their muscles too hard. So we're doing something physically, like we're physically exerting ourselves beyond what we have trained to do, beyond what we're capable of. And so we actually start to get that muscle tissue breaking down in our bodies. And like, if this sounds serious to you listening to this episode, like it is, you know, this is not something that you play around with. This is not something that's like, just, this is a big deal. This is a huge health risk, right? When these muscle cells are breaking down and we are in this state of rhabdomyolysis, we are going to have, you know, a lot of these substances released into the bloodstream and we can experience kidney damage. Like this is something that requires medical care, like this serious medical care, medical attention. And I don't want that to happen to you, right? I don't want you to think that this is no big deal. I see tens of thousands of other runners running, or even like I signed up for this race and I'm not super prepared, but I still feel like I need to do it and there's no option to like change. So I'm going to like go out and like still push myself as hard as possible. Not a good idea because, of course, physically, we can get ourselves into trouble with a lot of injuries and things like that because of the excess impact forces and repetitiveness of running 26.2 miles. But also, like internally, systemically, there's a lot of risk with trying to take on this kind of thing without proper training. So please don't do it. And then, of course, the second thing we have here is, severe dehydration and GI issues and stuff like that. Heat stroke, heat illness coming from exerting ourselves for this duration of time, right? Like hours and hours, and maybe not being knowledgeable or maybe not being prepared from a fueling and hydration approach. And so, if you're someone who maybe hasn't done a lot of training for your race, but you're going to be, about hydration, to be taking in electrolytes alongside with your fluid to prevent hyponatremia, which is low blood sodium levels. If you know that you need to be fueling during that race, if you know that you need to be taking care to avoid having your body temperature go too high, avoiding things like heat illness, there are definitely steps you can take to prevent it. But if you aren't aware of those risks or maybe don't appreciate those risks to the full extent, then of course you can run into more than just your cardiovascular system issues, your physical, joint, muscle, tendon issues, but even things like severe dehydration, heat illness, and things of that nature. Or on the flip side, if you don't know about the importance of electrolyte replacement in situations where you are sweating a lot and you're not taking electrolytes along with your fluid, then we can have issues with hyponatremia where people are over consuming fluids, drinking too much water without that electrolyte replacement. And, these things can be life threatening, right? These can be fatal in extreme cases. And yes, there are medics and there is medical care along all of the race courses that you encounter, and there are people there to help runners in need if they need it, but you don't want to be that runner. Like, you don't want to do things that are going to put you at risk, at a higher risk of being that runner, right? Because even if all the best planning, if every even with best laid plans and training and everything like that, you can still be the runner that something bad happens to on the day of a race. But if you could do no training, if you don't know about proper hydration, if you aren't bringing along fuel or additional fluids with you, like if you're not doing those basic things to take care of yourself and take care of your health on the race course, you are at a much, much, much higher chance of being that runner. And so nobody wants that because a lot of times these medical, providers are overwhelmed enough as it is, especially if it happens to be a particularly hot day. They've got enough on their plates. We don't need to be making choices that are going to add more strain to those resources that are there. And then, of course, along with dehydration, and the issues that go along with that, we can also have issues with GI, gastrointestinal distress. If we haven't kind of fueled properly before or during the race, dehydration can dramatically affect the digestive system and how it's functioning. Even just the jostling motion of doing that much running. We're not used to it. We have not trained properly for this, can lead to issues. We see an increase in the frequency of things like GI bleeding post marathon running, right? We see that, more runners, marathoners can have issues with that. And so again, if we have not trained properly, if we're allowing ourselves to get really dehydrated, if we're not fueling properly, if we haven't trained our entire system to be able to run that race, we are going to be at higher risk of these things. And then, of course, like mentally, it can be incredibly challenging to attempt something like this and not be successful, right? Because what I haven't really talked about in this episode up until this point is the fact that like you can try to raw dog a marathon. You may not even finish it, right? Like to sign up and to spend the money and to show up, maybe even travel or whatever it might be to get there. Like if you have not done any running, if you have not done any training, I mean, you might make it 10K, you might make it 10 miles. Maybe you'll make it past the halfway point. Maybe you're going to totally bonk in DNF and have something really severe happen to you at mile 22 or 24, right? Like this is what I'm talking about, like of showing up and doing the thing and getting the medal. I mean, that's assuming you even finish. And so, of course, there's a tremendous amount of disappointment, frustration, a lot of negative feelings that can come out from attempting something like this and not being able to do it. But with proper training and a smart strategy and preparing yourself as best as possible, you dramatically reduce your chances of not being able to finish. There's never a guarantee, right? I mean, unfortunately, part of the nature of marathon running is that it is extremely challenging. It is extremely difficult. Anything can happen over those 26.2 miles. Like nothing is guaranteed, even if we execute our training plan and all of our preparation perfectly. And that can be very hard to adjust to and very hard to kind of make peace with as runners. But if we also haven't done the training, and we're far more likely to not be successful in finishing this race because we have not trained ourselves properly to do it, that can be really challenging mentally. And, running is great. Running is good for us. Running is healthy for us. Running is, an amazing sport and community to be part of. As long as we're with the right people and looking for the right people and you know, saying no thank you to all the stuff that isn't good, because of course, like every sport, running is far, far, far from perfect. But it can be so great, so rewarding, such a positive thing in our lives that I don't want you to be doing anything that's going to take away from that. And improper training and improper strategies going into a race situation is definitely something that can take away from your enjoyment of the sport and from your sustainability and your long-term commitment to the sport. And that's just too bad, right? To have someone show up to a race, not be prepared, and just that lack of preparation is going to take away that person's love of running forever, right? I'm never doing anything like that ever again because it was so hard. It was like, it just about killed me. It was so difficult. I can't imagine ever wanting to run a step ever again because I'm so traumatized from how awful that was. Like, I don't want that to be your story. I don't want that to be the way that you think about running going forward in your life. And just simply being smart about training and just simply going into these races with a training plan and, with clear goals and expectations and putting that time and effort in leading up is what can really help someone love running and really get the most positive, benefit out of it and really enjoy it for what it can be. And then, of course, if we are running these races and we have not trained, we do not have proper training going in, the recovery from this stuff is going to be that much longer. We're talking about the extreme demands of running a marathon. I mean, it takes weeks to recover from a marathon, even for the most well-trained athletes. So if you have done no training and that demand is that much higher, and you've put that much more strain on body tissues and body systems that have not done the preparation, have not trained, have not been ready for that challenge, your recovery time is going to be significantly longer. And or you might be looking at, pretty severe medical attention and putting yourself in a very, very risky position. So, training matters. Training matters a lot. And there's a reason why everything, when we're talking about racing, like everything comes down to the training plan, right? You see training plans for 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, ultras. Like there's a reason why that is such a core part of running is the training plan. Like we're not all doing this because we're silly and like don't know how to run a marathon and, the people who are out there raw dogging it are smarter or more capable and know what they're doing. There's a rhyme to the reason behind this. And we know that building up that volume, building up that capability is the best way to adapt to the demands of running a marathon. And that's every body system, right? Metabolic changes, muscular and skeletal changes, our cardiovascular system adapting, our mental stamina adapting, training our gut to be able to hydrate and fuel while we're doing it. Like our body isn't just magically ready to take on this challenge. It's something that we need to prepare for. We need to take the time and kind of respect the distance of the marathon. Now, of course, I know that there are still always going to be people who are going to raw dog a marathon. Whether it's because they still kind of hold on to the belief system that I mentioned before of like, this isn't that hard. I'm really fit. I can do it. It doesn't matter. Or maybe there's someone who does have a lot of running experience, and this particular race you have not trained that well for, but you've done this before. Like, you're not a new marathoner. Maybe currently at your current fitness level, you're running at least a half marathon on a regular basis. You've got the gear, you know about fueling, you know about hydration. Like, you've got a lot of experience under your belt, even if it's not like a perfect training plan that you follow leading up to this race. If you are going to be going into a race without a lot of training, the couple things that I want you to do is adjust expectations for things like pacing and finish time. Focus on staying safe, focus on staying healthy, focus on things like fueling and hydration, taking lots of walk breaks, going slow, being very mindful about ways that you can reduce your risk, right? We don't want to show up and expect that we're going to just run as fast as we can for 26.2 miles, because that is how we put ourselves in an even greater chance of getting sick, injured, seriously hurt out there on the race course. We want to, of course, mitigate that damage and that risk as much as humanly possible. As well, like some races where there are multiple distances at the same event do allow you to change distances. And don't be afraid to do that. Like, if you've had a lot of setbacks in your training, if things are not going well, whatever the case, looking into switching to a shorter distance is a good idea, and ultimately a safer idea than just, showing up and attempting a marathon when you are not ready. And you know yourself best, right? So sometimes it takes just being really honest with ourselves about what we can do, what we can accomplish, what we want to attempt. And if it means that this time around we have to switch distances and do something shorter, that is okay. Just remember for next time, like, if you really still want to run this particular race, you still want to do this marathon, there's always next year. There's always next year. There's always another opportunity. And going into it with the best possible training, the best possible strategy, getting your body, your mind, your digestive system, everything like ready to do it is just a far better plan than showing up and raw dogging it. So, if you want those race day pictures at the end of the day, earning those medals, getting that attention online and people, giving you their congratulations and all of that stuff for completing these races, I would really love it if you committed to the whole process and also enjoyed it. Like I said at earlier in this episode, if you don't like running, but you still want to be participating in events and doing activities that you get medals, or you're getting a lot of like congratulations and support, it's not just about like likes and medals and stuff like that, but feeling supported by other people around you. There are tons of ways to do that do not require you to run marathons. You can do all kinds of different sports, different activities, different distances. You do not have to run marathons just because it seems like everyone and their grandma is running marathons right now. So, you want to train for things that are meaningful to you, train for things in a way that you're going to enjoy the process of training, enjoy the journey of training, and, really incorporate activity and movement into what makes you just a happy, healthy person. And so, just showing up and kind of doing the bare minimum in terms of training just to kind of earn a medal or just to get some attention online or just to hop on a trend that you see other people doing is just, never a really good idea. We want running, fitness, all of these things to ultimately be positives in our lives and make us healthier and happier and more fit, not be things that can put us at risk of potentially death if we are not smart about it. So that's my take on raw dogging marathons and whether or not it's ever a good idea. Spoiler alert, it isn't ever a good idea. But of course, just breaking down a little bit of the ins and outs of why somebody might do it, how we can, adjust our expectations to maybe do it a little bit more safely if we are underprepared going into a race unintentionally. And, don't be Barney Stinson. I mean, probably don't want to be a Barney Stinson in any areas of your lives, but, particularly when it comes to running a marathon, do not do what Barney Stinson did and just show up and run. All right, that's it for today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope I've given you a little bit of extra, boost of motivation that if you are currently training for a marathon, you are automatically on the right track just from following a training plan, just by preparing yourselves in the weeks and months leading up to your race. And if you have a race on your calendar or a race that you want to get ready for, you have not started training yet because maybe you don't have a plan, you don't know what you should be doing, you are looking for some help, for some guidance with getting ready for an upcoming event, then I would love to help you. I have an online program that I created just for runners. It is your one-stop shop for all things related to running. It's called the Fuel Train Recover Club. And this is my signature online program where you get everything you need to get ready for being the best runner you can be. Whether it's base building season, race season, off season, if you're looking at changing your body composition or getting ready to run your first 5K, if you're going from a 5K to a marathon, whatever you need, the Fuel Train Recover Club is here to set you up for success. We cover nutrition, we cover training, we cover recovery, we have training plans that you can follow along with and customize to your needs. We have sample meal plans, recipes, everything that you need to set you up for success as a runner. You can get more details about the Fuel Train Recover Club at the link in the show notes. And of course, I would love to see you in there. I would love to have you join me. That is it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please tune in next week for another all new episode on the Fuel Run Recover podcast. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.